And welcome to the Kall Bottom Up Show, sponsored by opednews.com, available on iTunes, Progressive Radio Network, and other places, including opednews.com/podcasts. My guest today is Paul Glover. Paul is the founder of the Ithaca Hours, one of the first local currency systems. He's also the founder of the Philadelphia Orchard Project, Citizen Planners of Los Angeles, the Ithaca Health Alliance, and numerous other organizations. He's the author of 6 books on economic development. He's a former professor of urban studies at Temple University, currently teaching ecological economics at Philadelphia University. He consults as green planners and speaks on community economic development. And he ran in 2014 as the Green Party candidate for the governor of Pennsylvania. His website is paulglover.org. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So we ran into each other at Trader Joe's in downtown Philly, and discussed, decided it would be a good thing to have you on. And I was telling you about the book I'm working on, Bottom Up, and you said you're working on one, The Mutual Class, and there are a lot of commonalities to them. So let's talk about your ideas about the mutual class, okay?
Thank you very much. The full title of this book would be From the Middle Class to the Mutual Class. The middle class has been the lodestone, the apex of the development of human civilization, of an American consumer society unsurpassed in human history, as far as we're concerned. And yet it is starting to dissolve. It has been starting to dissolve. And of course, there are lots of statistics about the pace and extent of that dissolution over the last decades. It was built as a bubble in time. Strong dollars, strong unions, strong manufacturing, strong military, and that has been declining, has been moving offshore. The resource base has been confining as the population increases. These intersections create what we now see as a difficulty for the middle class. And I think the middle class is not going to return to its former strength, and should not, in fact. There are 4 reasons that the middle class has dissolved and will dissolve. And I think that those are principally that for the first part, we're a sink or swim house by house class. Pay the mortgage, pay the rent, meet all the bills, the insurance and so forth. Every house has got to carry its own weight. If it does not, then it's gone. Secondly, it's a consumer class. We spend our wealth into landfills. This is a fairly blunt statement, but rather than using our wealth to create systems of mutual aid and solid local, regional power, least dependent on government or Wall Street, we buy stuff and throw it away. Thirdly, in order to be a middle class, you have to have a poor class down below. Without an impoverished class below us, we can't be in the middle. We can't look down at them and say they should get together and, oh, well, rather they should do stuff and make themselves rich like us. And fourthly, we have become a class, as a middle class, increasingly dependent upon the very institutions which are today dissolving us, weakening us. The consolidation of corporations, the globalization of corporations, has made them less accountable and less interested in what becomes of us as a middle class. They could care less about what happens to us. And so here we are, surprised, baffled, outraged. And there is something better before us. and something more essential than continuing to aspire to be middle class as conventionally defined, as relentlessly advertised. And the mutual class, as I see it, gets ahead by getting together. We create systems of mutual aid on a local and regional basis, particularly, as you say, from the bottom up. We don't wait for the government. We don't wait for Wall Street to become generous and kind.
You know, what you're saying about the middle class is almost like the middle class is a high that comes from the drug of capitalism.
Well, that's even more bluntly said than I have said, but I agree with you, yes.
And it has a painful, enormous cost, and it doesn't last that long, and it takes more and more cost to keep it going. Never thought about it this way, but you just made me think about it that way. Now, where you're going with this is the mutual class. So what's your elevator pitch description of the mutual class? Brief discussion of it, real brief description, and then we'll get into it in full-fledged detail.
Well, we rebuild the job base by rebuilding civilization. To every extent that there are crises before us, there are opportunities to reconstruct America in the direction away from a dependence on fossil fuels and large corporations toward the kind of local and regional rebuilding that enables us to live well with least dependence.
Now, I want to say that
on fossil fuels, particularly.
What you're describing is not some pie in the sky idea that you're just popping off the top of your head. You've done this. When I described your bio, it's a history of doing these things in real life with real people in real communities. So for my listeners and viewers, be aware that Paul has made this happen. He's talking about doing it on a bigger scale, but this stuff works and it's happened already. And what we're talking about is making it happen a lot more.
Thank you very much. I'm one of the millions of pioneers and inventors in this direction on behalf of community enterprise and community safety nets that we are thinking outside the box while the box is dissolving.
Well, one more thing I want to point out is what you describe in some of the material you sent me. You describe a work day that's 3 hours, and you take a break, go home, eat, have sex, or whatever, do some entertainment, then go back to work for 2 hours. That's a lot more like the way indigenous Aboriginal cultures live. It used to be that they were considered savages, suffering without technology, but now we know from studies of existing living Aboriginal cultures that they only work about 2-3 hours a day to meet their survival needs. So what you're really describing is the way humans lived for 99% of their existence until the onset of civilization, which brought hierarchy and slavery and domination and the worker class where most people worked long hours in order to take care of the wealthy.
So let's take the best of our technology, the best of our experience, and let's let go of the excess. It's an invitation to develop and live by a better purpose than merely shopping. Now, that's a huge cultural challenge because this is what we have been all trained. One of my college degrees is in marketing, and I realized very early on, and I value this insight, that we are being trained to be shoppers as the proof of our success as persons. of our significance and of our pride. And I bailed out on that a long time ago, which gave me the latitude and the fortitude to explore in a whole different direction on behalf of the beauty of people, the beauty of nature, and the beautiful capabilities that we have by combining much more than by competing.
There's a quote that I like from Antoine Saint-Exupéry in his book, The Little Prince, and I don't remember it exactly, but it goes along the lines, there's a man who spends all his time counting, and what he is not a man, he's a mushroom. And that's kind of what we see when we have people who live their lives to buy the next designer bag or fancy $1,000 shoes.
Mm-hmm.
What a way to live.
And by contrast, we can fully employ each and every one of us on this continent in this process of rebuilding civilization so that our homes are warm and cool without fossil fuels. Our food is clean and fresh and healthy.
Like it was for our grandparents.
Well, of necessity, yes, before they developed the extraordinary chemicals which surround and contaminate us.
I mean, our grandparents, our grandparents and great grandparents all were enjoyed eating organic food because that's all there was.
That's all they had to eat. Yes, indeed. I mean, they had other challenges to their health, but science has contributed to expanding our longevity, while at the same time, science is, through its chemical extravagances, making life more precarious. And so, again, the best of technology needs to be brought forward while the worst of it needs to be excised and left behind. We need to learn the lessons of history, as often is said, or we will repeat the damage done to us. So everyone can be fully employed in this process. Healthcare is an enormous challenge for our country, and the mutual aid process within this, the mutual class, can take control again of healthcare. And this is one of the initiatives that I took years ago by starting the Ithaca Health Alliance, a health co-op that I created, of course, with the collaboration and boldness of people in the community, through which, for $100 each per year, we gradually and incrementally covered our members for 12 categories of common emergency anywhere in the world to specified maximum amounts. Then we built a free clinic, providing both holistic and standard care.
And you talk about how this community building and sharing of resources is something that is a deep part of American history that has just recently been lost.
You're exactly right. That about 100 years ago, a third of American households were insured through these fraternal benefit organizations, of which there were hundreds in this country. The Moose, the Elks, the Oddfellows, the Funny Handshake people. And of course, they had their limitations. They had racial exclusions, they had religious exclusions. And to revive these in a much more enlightened manner, to do the enlightened services that they had provided, they built the hospitals, orphanages, old folks' homes, sanitaria. They paid sickness and death benefits for pennies a week to a working class. And they, in fact, became the precursor, the essential foundation for what became the middle class. That solidarity.
But something went wrong.
Huh?
But something has gone wrong.
Well, yes, and we diverted ourselves into becoming shoppers and consumers. As I said, we've spent our wealth, our power into landfills, and we celebrated being individualistic and distinguishing each other by the car we drive and the house we live in, rather than by our common aspirations, our celebration together of the beauty of our children. I mean, it's even becoming a, a hunger game in education where some do well and some fall behind. And the new generations, and I talk with my students at Philadelphia University about this, that they're being screwed. I'm being honest with them, and it's certainly not astonishing to them to hear. They know they're being screwed. They're paying tuitions, they're going into debt. And I say, in fact, now this is a heresy. This is not the sort of thing a professor says, but although ordinarily we have moral obligations to repay debts, here the game is rigged so criminally that they are worse than indentured servants. They're in debt, most of them, for the rest of their lives to one extent or another. They have a primary moral obligation to serve the world. And that it is the primary moral obligation of elder generations like ourselves to educate, to transfer knowledge to the next generations easily so that society can progress. And when elders make instead a tall, hard, and profitable wall between knowledge and the next generations to exploit and extract from them indefinitely.
That's insane.
It's insane, it's
Psychopathic.
criminal, and it's destructive of every generation. So I tell them their primary moral obligation is to do good in the world, not to repay the student
You
loan.
say you teach a class, ecological economics. What's that about? What do you teach?
Well, it's the intersection of economics. I emphasize that economics is not dry, musty theorems on blackboards written by geezers, but it's a dynamic and bold process by which we assess value to things according to what we value, and that is changing. And the intersection of economics with the environment, with the natural resource base, and with the capacity and beauty of people, animals, plants, and even rocks from which all these come, is the greatest priority in economic thinking. And we convert this not into merely just pie in the sky, as you earlier said, but into real practical, step-by-step processes for food, fuel, housing, healthcare, planning, education, transportation, finance, and jobs. It's all nuts and bolts in the direction of and on behalf of the compatibility of humans and nature.
So, what did you teach in your last session of your class?
Most recently, that was yesterday. In fact, I taught both grant writing and the writing of laws. These are practical tools, and for some of them, it's an outlier. But I've subdivided this course into a bunch of raviolis, as I say, food, fuel, housing, healthcare, and so forth. And I emphasize that these all intersect, interrelate. This is holistic or whole systems thinking, that while we are focused within each class each week on one or another of these elements of civilization and of human society, they all will overlap and interrelate. I emphasize that over and over again.
I think that it's really important to take that approach, a systems approach to economics. But I don't think most economists do that.
No, conventional economics is merely the race for bigger numbers in the bank accounts of fewer people.
as compared to holistic systems economics? How does that compare to that? What is that?
which considers the effect of economic decisions and on indefinite future generations and on the integrity of the planet. It's a far broader purpose than a mad scramble, a hunger game for the next 15 seconds or 15 minutes of rise or fall of stocks on the exchange.
How do people learn more about holistic systems economics?
Golly, there are so many organizations dedicated to this, both on a local, regional, national scale. Um, uh, I I think by Googling, my gosh, and YouTube, these are powerful tools. In fact, I emphasize this in the course, that the textbooks are way behind the time as soon as they're published. That in fact, you go to YouTube and you plug in whatever you're interested in, and the word green economy or any keywords that are relevant, and you'll find local and regional and national, continental, global organizations. There are millions of people. And I emphasize also that when we look at news conventionally is just how stupid people are, how dangerous people are. And the real news behind and beneath and lifting all of us is the millions of people and hundreds of thousands of organizations worldwide which are dedicated to these principles of ecology and social justice, which are bringing people together, which are celebrating our beautiful contributions to each other and to a better future for indefinite future generations. So it's all out there. Just start Googling.
Well, but talk a little bit about the green economy, because that's something that you're very interested in.
Yeah, there are dozens of tools. There's an equitable development toolkit that one can find online. And years ago, I wrote an article about grassroots economic development, which is linked from my website, which links to all these tools that
Your
enable
website is
average people.
Your website is kallglover.org.
Yes, sir. PaulGlover.org. It's Paul like, I don't know, Rand Paul? No. Or like Glover, like Danny Glover. Philadelphia, I spell my name just by saying like Danny Glover, and they know how to spell it here.
Yeah.
And so PaulGlover.org, org for organizer. I like to take these initiatives. I see holes in the social fabric where we need more control, and there are more possibilities when we come together. I enjoy framing possibilities and giving them names and acronyms and a simple introductory program and a website, and then calling initial meetings, finding out who are the people who are most excited to do these sorts of things, and then gradually let them take control of it. My idea of leadership is knowing when to follow, and sometimes I learn faster, slower, according to the need to intervene and to guide. But I finally, I'm pleased when my board outvotes me and they've taken control and ownership of the program that I launched and make it into something that is even better, in fact, than what I conceived quite often.
Now,
So the Orchard Project just set out a table in public places with a colorful display and said, let's plant fruit trees in all the vacant lots. We have 30,000 vacant lots in this very hungry city. And people responded very favorably, very quickly. I created an email list of about 500 people, sent it out, introducing the first meeting. About 30 people showed up. At the second meeting, 18. At the third meeting, 12, the fourth meeting, then we had our board of directors, the people powerfully committed, and people who actually knew how to plant fruit trees. So through the years, taking initiatives of this kind to bring people together to do what they have been wanting to do has been my role, and a great enjoyment. I've met thousands and thousands of people through this process. And then I yield to their leadership after kicking the ball into play.
You say you sent me a copy of like your book proposal, and you're saying there millions are leading the shift towards real power. We're marshaling the jobs that make revolution orderly. We're converting gripes into actions. Talk about that.
Well, as a product myself of the Vietnam era, we were powerful gripers. We didn't really comprehend a whole lot about geopolitical considerations, but we thought there was something really wrong in this, that our generation was being ground up into hamburger, and we were killing people halfway around the world. And we didn't see this as being a big priority for defending our nation or making our society better. We gradually developed a critique and became angry, of course. But beyond that, we thought, okay, if these presumptions of our society are wrong, then what is right? And how do we begin to enact that? So beyond griping, I sang during the early 70s particularly, there began to arise what's been called an alternatives movement. And in terms of all of these elements of society, the decentralization of domination of all industries and all of our basic needs was an outlier notion at the time, because we were quite happy yielding and delegating our authority as citizens, as consumers, to bigger and bigger entities. And these have become big enough now, as said at the beginning of our conversation, to devour, dilute, dissolve the middle class. So the alternatives rise again, I think, to the fore at this time, to enable us to take back that power, beginning where we live, with who we know, and with people we don't know, but who share our common concerns. It's a great and a fun process. So people can
take back the power.
Well, people can join the mutual class by first changing attitudes, like what is the purpose in life? And when do you have enough stuff? Those are really basic first steps to joining the mutual class. Reducing overhead, I think, is essential. It's at the same time. It's like, okay, we're on this treadmill. We're paying this mortgage, this rent, this health insurance bill, we're paying the car, we're paying all the things that we've been encumbered by. We're carrying these loads around us upon our backs in order to be regarded by other people as middle class. And a lot of people are bailing out from the middle class. You know, you can read about it where the Wall Street broker just buys a little farm. This is going on all the time. There are little episodes of this sort. So on a personal level, those are the first things that can be done to change attitude and to reduce overhead, to downsize or right size, it's being called. But then most essentially, it's reconnecting by creating, joining, or starting these mutual aid safety nets. So we get off of the treadmills and create safety nets. We can't wait for Franklin Roosevelt to come back and strengthen and expand our safety nets. We can't wait for multinational corporations to care about us. Why? We're Americans. We're number one. That's not happening.
Number one consumers.
Huh?
Number one consumers.
That's right. Number one consumers. And and every time we shop, and the wealth, the money, the authority, the power, the control goes farther away from where we live.
So we need to create safety nets. We have to move away from centralized systems and processes.
Yes.
What does that look like?
Well, I mean, ultimately, we can create cities and towns where everybody's employed. Every square mile is beautiful. Where cities are safe playgrounds for children. Where food is fresh. Where water is clean. Where our homes are warm and cool without fossil fuels or utility bills. This is an enormous national project.
I'm taking notes. When I'm not looking at you, I'm taking notes.
Oh, thank you very much. An honor to have notes taken. This is an enormous national project.
Now, when you do that, when you have local food, that means you don't get fruit in the winter, right?
Oh my gosh, with greenhousing and the selection of varieties, there's an extensive capacity in the winter. I mean, you could still import. The expansion of import replacement, the import replacement programs, that is to say, communities which to the maximum extent possible say, well, we are going to create our own money, we're going to create our own health system, we're going to create our own food supply system, or regional systems, to the extent that our necessities are created and maintained on a regional basis. We then have the latitude and the luxury to import those things which we don't have available locally. And we can do that to the maximum extent ecologically possible. But with greenhouses, I mean, particularly in a city like Philadelphia, with 30,000 vacant lots, if as a priority those lots were available for greenhousing, then, I mean, here in Philadelphia, we're growing figs, fig trees, apricots. We're growing lots of things which are available to us. And with proper storage of these things grown in the city, within the city, and regionally, with proper storage, with a priority for thinking regionally and maximizing regional capabilities, then we will, in fact, be able to not quite live in the tropics all year, but have very comfortable, ample, and diverse diets throughout the year.
So how do people get involved in this?
Well, I'll be very happy to speak with people, and I travel the country and beyond, and I talk about this notion and grassroots economic development. Through paulglover.org, I can be contacted, be very happy to speak with people. And I've written, as you mentioned early, 6 books, which subdivide this process into specific how-to doses for creating a community currency or money system.
Now let's talk about that. You say when Americans take control of money, we are wealthy enough to build an America where it's easy to stay healthy and get healed, where costs of living get smaller and our lives get bigger. What do you mean take control of money?
Well, currently we depend on a Federal Reserve system, which is actually a consortium of private banks, the largest banks, and they define the availability of money. And that defines who gets whose house gets repaired and whose health gets repaired. To decentralize that process, take more control of money locally and regionally, expands our local and regional capability to decide for ourselves what gets celebrated, what gets expanded, what values are preeminent.
So you mean by taking control of money, pulling it from centralized systems and applying it locally?
Clearly, yes. The simplest thing to do, of course, is to move money from multinational banks into credit unions, and within the credit unions to create designated funds, say, for solar power. At the same time, as in Ithaca, I designed paper money on my computer in 1991. Pretty colorful money with pictures of children, waterfalls, and trolley cars, and even a bug found only in Ithaca. And then I convinced over the next few years several thousand people and 500 businesses, including a bank, the hospital, movie theaters, bowling alleys, health clubs, restaurants, a catalog of ways to spend this paper
What
money.
did we call the money?
Ithaca Hours. It was denominated in hours, and an hour of labor equaled an hour of, one Ithaca hour equaled an hour of basic labor, or $10, which at the time doubled the minimum wage in the Ithaca area.
So,
And so it could be used either directly as an exchange of labor for labor, or for the purchase of goods and services. And it was flexible enough so that a massage therapist who really can't work an 8-hour day could say, well, I need 4 of your Ithaca hours, or I will take $20 plus for Ithaca hours. $40 an hour was at that time common for massage therapy. So the professionals could mix and match, adjust according to their expectation. This brought them into the system who otherwise would not have participated at 1 hour per hour. We invited people to in the direction of an hour for an hour. We did not require it, but it was a cultural invitation which a lot of professionals did accept.
so you're saying that a massage therapist would get 4 labor hours in exchange for 1 hour of massage?
Yes, yeah.
You have doctors or lawyers involved?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. There was an ophthalmologist, in fact, who was about to retire, who had made his money, and he, when Ithaca hours were tendered, accepted 1 Ithaca hour for an appointment. There were a number, I would say, a good number of professionals who caught the spirit of the hour and the hourly wage and equity and how people live. I mean, it's like, if your sewer breaks, you don't call a lawyer, right? Or maybe you do, I don't know, depending on the situation, but a ditch digger deserves at least as much as a lawyer in a situation like that. And that's hard work. Hard work. So it invited us to think about who's
out when that happens, I think, though.
Huh?
Class and hierarchy really scream.
Exactly that. And so
how do you handle that?
We brought this conversation to the center of transactions in Ithaca. And in fact, the cultural impact was, I think, even greater than the millions of dollars worth of this money that we transacted. We made grants to over 100 community organizations. We made loans of our own paper money up to $30,000 value without charging interest. That's a monetary revolution.
Where did you get the resources for the loans?
By printing the money. And we did not
That's what the Federal Reserve does. I mean,
Well, yes, though we were more conservative than the Federal Reserve because we had very exacting standards for the making of loans and of grants. We we issued them as a proportion, a strict proportion of the total amount of the Ithaca Hours otherwise issued.
how many Ithaca hours were issued? How many were in circulation?
I think we reached about $120,000 equivalent at the maximum. And the
That's
multiplier,
12,000 hours at $10 an hour.
yeah.
Okay.
And so the multiplier effect, if you have money with a boundary around it, it bounces around indefinitely throughout the community, where dollars come to town, shake a few hands, and they go off to fight wars, chop down mountaintops, things like that. And we had a good time. It was
Well,
my
let me
favorite.
let me get this straight.
Yeah, yeah.
These hours, because they were based on exchanging labor and services, you couldn't just, they couldn't leave the community. They had no value outside of the community. Is that right?
That's, well, we had so much publicity, in fact, that people were able to spend them in New York City and elsewhere with people who had heard about the local currency. And they thought, someday I will go to Ithaca. Of course, collectors, in fact, at the time, Japan was in an era of stagflation. The banks just couldn't loan money. People didn't want to borrow money. And so the Japanese academics and activists and government officials were all over Ithaca. The Chinese government came to Ithaca. The Chinese sent a delegation from the People's Bank. They bought me a meal at a Chinese restaurant. We talked it over, and they got approval all the way up the line to the Premier of China to start sample our systems, because at the time they were joining the World Trade Organization, and they were concerned that they were tying their economy to the destiny of the dollar.
What effect does that have, having an hour system that's outside of the normal economic system?
Well, of course, autonomy, and we were not merely shuffling dollars around. We were adding to the money supply, and that enabled us not only to have more control, but more latitude, more capacity for using money for things we believed in our community, outside of the banking system and the priority of banker to maximize return. We earned much more than interest in numerical quantity. We earned out what I call community interest, the strengthening of the community's capacity to meet its needs according to its values. And in our case, it was for ecology and social justice.
How about the arts? Are the arts involved in this at all?
Oh, yeah, a bunch of arts organizations. I've long believed that artists should run the economy, in fact, that beauty should be a priority.
Why?
Beauty, because
No, artists running the economy. Why do you say that?
because
Your dog agrees.
huh?
Your dog agrees.
Why can't
Your dog agrees with you.
it's the loudest dog in the world. And it wakes up at 5:30 in the morning, and the neighbors have noted. So yes, indeed, it's not my dog,
Oh.
but it
But,
agrees with us. It agrees with
why
us
should
emphatically.
artists run the economy?
Why should artists run the economy? Because artists have a sensibility about something more grand at their best than mere numbers. The human spirit. I mean, we all want to be happy, and numbers alone don't make us happy unless you're a mathematician. And I, with all respect, but even mathematicians define happiness in some regards more broadly than numbers and uh, and beauty. I think is something that artists are more. I mean, everybody is an artist. Everybody is an artist, and I think an economy at its best recognizes and celebrates that part of our nature to resonate with nature. And so artists address that. I mean, the proof of this is that we paid gigantic amounts of money to go to concerts,
True.
to listen to comedians, to resonate with the aesthetic.
How did the artists fit into the uh, Ithaca Hours?
Well, there were art galleries, whatever is part of an arts economy, explicitly or indirectly, art supply stores. Um, you could buy pretty much everything in Ithaca, including within the arts sector. Uh, Theater, movies.
Really?
We had the two independent movie theaters in Ithaca. They accepted Ithaca Hours for the full price of movie tickets.
That's incredible.
Yeah, galleries, uh, everything arts related. In Philadelphia, I have launched the notion of Philadelphia Art Cash, and I've made a list of art related sectors and both direct and ancillary to the arts as a pivot for expanding the notion of arts uh, and the contribution of arts to the local economy.
Now, tell me more about that.
Well, I think that arts should be pivotal and center and core part, not only just to celebrate the artists, but to raise and liberate the artist within every person. I mean, look at Philadelphia's school system, where the first thing they cut are the arts.
Same
And
in
so,
Chicago.
when young people get frustrated, angry, what are they going to do? Right up, they're going to like pick up a gun and beat each other up, or are they going to write a poem, draw, make a work of art, sing a song? I mean, the arts are an alternative and a much more constructive and creative and beautiful outlet for human confusion and frustration and anger.
Talk more about Philadelphia Art Cash. What is that?
Well, it is a proposal. I've sought grants for this, and it hasn't caught fire with the grantors yet. It would need some seed money. Um,
What's your pitch?
well, I mean, we're looking at STEM jobs: science, technology, engineering, math, all capitals. We need also STEM jobs, lowercase, which address, I don't know, soil, turf, earth, mulch, uh, and the arts, that the soft disciplines need to be celebrated and compensated and put to the core of an economy which replenishes the earth, which celebrates our beauty as people, our creativity, rather than just extracting from the earth at an ever expanding rate to make products that we buy, show to each other, and throw away. I I can I consider shopping malls as landfill depots. Everything stacked neatly, shining on shelves in shopping malls will someday be buried in landfills in pieces, usually. So the arts are a counterpoint, and they go right. Again, when I studied marketing, they said, all right, here's how you take the basic human desires for companionship, intimacy, sex, security, and translate these into a craving for your product. And at a tender age, I thought this was disgusting. So, I mean, I took a degree in bullshit. Very, very useful, I find, in being able to craft and frame and promote what I do believe in, rather than to exploit people's natural human desires for things that don't really meet those needs.
Kind of green marketing, eh?
Exactly. And this was 50 years ago, literally. So I've enjoyed this process of being able to communicate those things I do believe in, those values that I do have. And I very early on, and unusual, I think, among us boomers, because of the marketing degree and because of the hypocrisy and damage that I saw early on, got off of the treadmill and said, I'm really not interested in owning a whole lot of stuff. I'm much more interested in celebrating the simple beauty of nature and people, and to helping people come together to meet those needs in a way which is consistent with the tolerances of the planet and which is appreciative of what the planet provides. And so it has brought me, having started these various organizations that model the practicability of these values, to the notion of what I'm calling the mutual class, which says, you know, let's let go of trying to be middle class and impress each other with all the crap we can buy. Let's let go of the idea of middle class and trying to impress each other with the slick car or any of the variety of things by which the middle class is typically identifying.
Lured, bedazzled, seduced.
Amen, sir. Yes, exactly that. And that the mutual class invites us to step off the tight ropes and create our own safety nets.
It's not just a safety net, though, it's a value system. This is something that I've been thinking a lot about in writing about bottom up. Bottom up values are about taking care of each other, caring about each other, about empathy,
Mm-hmm.
about looking at other people as a part of us, looking at nature as a part of us. And in a lot of ways, this is the way that Native Americans live their lives, looking at the nature around them as their family, as their relatives, as part of them. So I think that what you're talking about with a mutual class is a class that includes trees and sky and birds and fish and rocks and everything.
Yes, upon which we depend, ultimately.
Yeah.
And we've been distracted by a dependence on institutions which flog us, which require us to keep up or fall behind. And to embrace the values that you have just described, we must have practical alternatives. And those practical alternatives will not come from a federal government. They will not come increasingly from a state government, many local governments. They will not come from corporations, though there are B corporations which do entitle boards of directors to make decisions based other than on maximum return to shareholders, the B corporation. And there are a multitude of local initiatives that are being taken that are asserting and proving the practicability of coming together so that we're not forced to compete with each other in order to survive.
Now, let's go back to Ithaca Hours. How many different communities around the country, around the world, have adopted something like this? And what's the generic name for something like Ithaca Hours? Time banking, I think, is the term.
Well, the form that I created a paper currency, which would be called a complementary currency or a community currency. Time banking was an early form of a computer-based credit system. There are distinctions between these. Each has its attributes and benefits. Now, there are hybrids, both of paper and online currencies. And there's cyber cash of various kinds. There's a constellation. There's an endless exploration.
And how many of them are there around the country? Are there 10,
Well,
1,000, 100,000?
I started the Ithaca Hours in 1991. We planted the flag, the first bioregional currency. And there was enormous media attention at the time. By 1996, I was doing 1, 2, or 3 media interviews a day. So the word was getting around. It was fascinating people that average folks were just taking control of money directly by printing it and getting away with it. We found the space between the laws. And so over the next few years, I think over 90 communities in the United States started their own community currency based on my first edition of the book, Hometown Money. The reason that Ithaca became a gigantic system with thousands of individuals and 500 businesses, including some government agencies, was because it had a networker at the core, at the center of the process. That was me promoting, facilitating, and troubleshooting circulation of the money relentlessly. It was a lot of fun. The other communities, in many cases, were, and I managed it as a social enterprise. I actually made a modest living doing it.
How? How did you make money out of it?
Well, I published a newspaper 6 times a year, the directory of the thousands of ways you could spend the money. And in that, I had display advertisements. Also had some grants, and collectors bought some of the money.
The grants, where did they come from?
The grants, curiously, AmeriCorps, Vista, the federal agency, which is kind of the domestic Peace Corps, caught wind of this very early on, and for 3 years, they funded me.
Oh, this was in the Clinton era.
That's so, yes.
Yeah.
AmeriCorps. I mean, AmeriCorps still exists, though it's being challenged. And we need much more of this kind of federal program.
How do libertarians feel about this?
Oh my gosh, the Cato Institute. One thing I enjoyed particularly about the local currency is that it appealed to people across the political spectrum. People on the far left liked it a lot. People on the far right liked it a lot. And people who just thought, well, this is a nice idea and practical, they liked it a lot. The most conservative human being in Ithaca, New York, owned a restaurant, an all-American eatery. And he would buy me lunch at his all-American eatery. We would sit down and disagree about everything in the world. And then we would shake hands and agree that local currency was good for our community.
Is it still around? You left. Did it take you to keep it going?
That was the lesson learned, that when I transferred it to a board of directors so that I could develop the Ithaca Health Alliance, dedicated, talented, energetic people kept it going for several more years, but after a certain time, it became overwhelming for them. It really needs somebody in the pivot seat, constantly promoting, facilitating, troubleshooting circulation. And it became smaller and smaller, but now it's being replaced by a new generation called Ithacash, ithacash.com. And that's the hybrid of paper currency with online trading. Very talented, younger generation taking over community currency in Ithaca.
It's almost like
I'm very pleased.
a local economy needs a heart beating to keep the pulse going.
Yes, exactly. I mean, most of the work of making the system happen in Ithaca was the tens of thousands of conversations among people in Ithaca about why they were doing it, why they liked it. I published in my newsletter, in my newspaper, 300 success stories, little vignettes about why people liked the local currency, how they earned it, how they spent it, and a delightful collage of reasons, very articulate, in the community, why people got onto this and embraced it for so many years. But its heyday was the first, I'd say, 8 years, because it had the networker at the core. In the more recent edition of my book, Hometown Money, I lay it all out and make it clear how it can be managed and funded. So,
is there one in the Philadelphia area?
In Philadelphia, there was, called Equal Dollars, and it was funded very generously by Resources for Human Development for quite a number of years. They called me up early on, and I oriented them to how to do this. But then the founding director of the agency moved on, and the new director did not regard it as a priority, so it was not funded. There are ways to fund this that need to be diversified, and it's all waiting to happen. But around the world, there are other community currencies likewise. Within the United States, there are half a dozen community currencies currently they're doing well.
What did the funding go towards?
The funding?
Yeah.
Well, printing the money. You know, you print one of these notes for maybe 8 cents, and it's worth $10. Printing the newspaper, and paying my own rent. My landlords took local currency for the full price of paying the rent. A number of people in Ithaca paid their rent fully or partly with local currency. So the basic operation of the system.
So paying you?
Well, among other things, yes, I was the networker. I had to pay housing and food, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And I earned, it was a social enterprise. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So you got to pay a networker. It has to be professionalized. It's like the game of Monopoly is over in a few hours. You know, there's a bunch of people sitting around playing Monopoly, and it's over in a few hours. But the game, the reality of anti-monopoly money is an ongoing process, just like you're starting a food co-op or a credit union or any business. It's got to go on with the capability presumed to endure for a long, long time.
It's like Act Blue. It's the website that a lot of left-wing and democratic organizations and politicians use to process donations. Donation there, they asked, please add a tip. They asked for 10% or whatever to help pay for the operations of Act Blue. And this idea of monetization to support this kind of an organization is a really important part of it that has to happen.
That's right. I did not accept Ithaca Hours from the Ithaca Hours Bank to pay myself, because that would have been inflationary. I mean, if you just print up a bunch of money and then you shove a bunch of it in your pocket just at random, that would be inflationary. So I never did that. I always earned my own Ithaca hours for sales of the display ads.
Okay.
The Ithaca Health Alliance, same thing. I started that out. Members paid $100 a year. We had them covered for 12 categories of common emergency, gradually, incrementally. And only after several years did I begin to accept, at the board's insistence, a modest hourly payment for managing that system.
So it's time to wrap. This has been a great conversation. You've done such fascinating, empowering work that really is bottom up, mutual society. Wrap it up. What do you want to say to finish things?
Well, I have a mutual appreciation for your work as well.
Thank you.
And I'd be very happy to continue the conversation through paulglover.org. My phone number, email, Twitter, and Facebook are all there. Be happy to connect. And thank you so much.
All right. It's been a pleasure. It's Paul
Sure,
Glover.
Rob.